Kia ora koutou. Hello everybody and welcome back to Epic Aotearoa Create a Better Future podcast with your host Joe Hawtai, and I'm grateful and privileged to have an incredible man with me this evening. Well, it's evening for us, 8 o'clock here in NZ, 1800 I think for Dan in Brizzy at the moment, and Mr. Daniel Cooper, former Australian Special Air Service operator and team leader. And mate, it's been a long time. Really, really good to see you, bro. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, mate. It has been a long time.
Yeah.
And it's good to catch up. So thanks for reaching out, mate, and organising this. Looking forward to actually having a bit of a chat, and hopefully the first of a few sort of offline as well.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you first for making time to be with us. I know it's evening there for you, and you've got your wife and kids and stuff there, so appreciate them letting you come away to spend some time with me for the next sort of hour and a half. But for our audience in that here, this is probably going to be at least a two-part session with Dan. There's a lot of ground to cover. And what I'd like to do, Dan, if it's all right with you, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a bit of a rundown, a background of yourself, what you've done or how long you spent in the Defence Force in total, and in particular with the regiment, and also what you do now. And then that will sort of paint a bit of a frame and give us a bit of context for how we'll delve into the rest of this conversation and interview, bro.
Yep, yeah, so I joined the Army late, I think it was around 97, so late sort of 90s, off the back of an apprenticeship. So I was still pretty young at that stage. I think I actually had my 21st birthday at the training establishment at Kapuka. It was around 3.5 years in the Airborne Battalion once I left. Just seemed like an exciting place to go, so I thought I'd give that a crack. End of the day, it's just another infantry battalion that has that parachute capability. But I was always really keen on testing myself at the highest level sort of thing. So I joined to give selection a go. Passed that, thankfully, first time, and then I spent the next, I think, 18 years, or around 18 years in the SAS sort of thing. So, as you know, that kind of got pretty busy there, early 2000s, and no one saw that coming. But it was just sort of, it happened so fast, and it spun so quickly, just kind of before you know it, 18 years is gone. You know, you're starting to have kids. So did that during that period. Started studying sports science because I just had a real interest in human performance, and I was looking at how to better prepare guys, how to reduce injuries, how to increase longevity. A little bit around myself as well, but sort of looking to bring that information in, and that led into a Masters in Strength and Conditioning, and then a Masters of Research in Integrated Cognitive and Physiological Training. On the back of that, and kind of creating a network and just getting out and talk to people, I got offered a position, or sort of inquired and got offered a position with the Queensland Reds. So I went and did 2 years in professional sport, and then sort of just through some family transitions, I stepped back from working full-time to look after the kids and picked up a PhD scholarship. So now sort of 2/3 of the way through a PhD, looking essentially at how to prepare people sort of for performance in really high pressure, sort of high consequence environments. So looking at a lot around sort of threat response, behaviours under threat, these sort of things, trying to understand them and how to prepare people so that you get the best performance out of them in these environments. And then in around that, there's a whole heap of adventure racing, a whole heap of fitness stuff, and then just trying to work out how to be a good dad, which is probably the toughest bit of it all.
Man, awesome, mate. Incredible. So good to hear. And we're going to delve into some of those things. Some of them might sort of cross over as we hear more from you. But just for the audience, and I gave you a bit of a heads up, that's part of the reason why, ladies and gentlemen, why this, I just, to give your experiences and the value that I know that you're going to add to not only myself, but the listeners that will take the time. We can't and just wouldn't be able to cover all of that in one session. So I'm grateful to have this time with you, and then definitely want to follow it up with another session. And in this one, I touched on with you, I'd really be keen to delve into your time in particular within the unit, because what I've been finding, or what we've been finding, my co-host Brian Osman, who can't make it tonight, we've been getting a lot of feedback from people that have really enjoyed, people like yourself that have come out and shared some of their experiences and the mindset around some of that. And it's been really helpful for those that haven't even served in the unit, civilians, and those that have just served in regular Green Army type stuff themselves, that have struggled with transition and or that are in the military still today. So to have this time and to get as much value out of it, I just wanted to pitch and focus sort of around that stuff first. But as we go, obviously responses and stuff from you might delve into other things that you're currently doing at the moment. But ladies and gentlemen, you can understand from listening to that there's there's a reason behind why. We just want to sort of want to break this up into at least a couple of parts with yourself, Dan. So again, bro, so good to see you. I think last time I remember seeing you, I was probably tapping out, getting tapped by you when Taff was running some of the BJJ stuff at Swanbourne Barracks in the gym there. So,
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
it is a long time. But man, it was good. And obviously having the privilege to play some rugby with you while we're still serving in the unit at the time with associates. So it was definitely good times and good memories. So yeah, you still look the same, bro. So really good to see you. Mate, I want to jump into sort of the first question that I've got. And you sort of painted a bit of a nice picture, like very, very, in my opinion, high achieving with regards to what you've been able to do. And it's normal for, I think anyway, for people like yourself to be very humble about their achievements and just sort of glazing over, you sort of gloss over masters and working on 2/3 of a PhD and having this position to work at the Queensland Reds. You're speaking just sort of glazing over that, but in my head I'm thinking, hang on, there's stories there just in and of itself. But mate, I guess it could be easy for people to think that he must have had a good life, or he's just had it easy. Those sorts of perceptions may be there. But I was wondering if you wouldn't mind just sort of talking us through briefly, before I talk about some of the adventure racing stuff and the CrossFit stuff as well, about what some of that upbringing for you was like. Any significant things that stand out to you, any challenges, maybe any sibling rivalry and that sort of stuff, and including things like values and really good lessons that you learned from your family and friends and your upbringing in general. Would you mind taking us through that?
Yeah, no, not a problem at all. I kind of look back a little bit of it, because a lot of what I do around exploring how people became really good with performance is looking at where they come from. You know what I mean? And everything points back to your early environment. You know what I mean? Like, there's a bit of genetics in there, but it seems a lot of it is around the environment and the interaction between your genetics and that environment. So my upbringing was kind of very sort of blue collar. So my old man was a bricklayer. Mum was a stay-at-home mum, or just kind of looked after us full time. And I think the first maybe 6 to 7 years, I would say, maybe even a little bit longer, the old man used to go away for work during the week, sort of thing. So he'd go away up into areas probably 2-3 hours away from where we were living, and bricklay Monday to Friday. We'd leave Sunday night, bricklay Monday to Friday, then he'd come back Friday night, sort of thing. So we'd see him leave Sunday, he'd get back Friday night after we were in bed. So we'd spend Saturday with him and Sunday. So when I was growing up, he was away a lot. And to be honest, I don't know whether that was good or bad or indifferent, really, sort of thing. That was just, I think you just get used to what is normal for you. I didn't really look too deep into it, sort of thing. But he was, like, when he was there on the weekends, he'd take it to sport, do all these other things. So within that, it was sort of fairly normal. And then as I got a little bit older, we kind of moved more into like the foothills of the Blue Mountains outside of Sydney. And in there, we had a little bit more land. We had where we lived kind of back onto a national park. So I was able to, or I had a bit of freedom to just go and explore the bush. As long as I was back by dinner, everything was all right. So I had that environment where I was allowed or given sort of enough flexibility to go and explore, get myself into a little bit of trouble, get myself out of it. But knowing that if I got into any real trouble, my parents were there to help me, sort of thing. So, it's probably, fairly common when you go back, 20, 30 years and even further. That's how kids were. They just went out and did their own stuff, sort of thing. So my actual upbringing was fairly normal, sort of thing. Like, I went to small schools, so they were sort of fairly small, and you got to know everyone. So back then you'd play contact sport for little lunch, for lunch, these sort of things. So, you might have 30 kids in school that are playing a game of Red Rover or rugby. So you'd be in year 2 or 3 having to take on your kids in year 5 or 6. sort of things. So when I look back at it, there was a lot of really good exposure in that sort of aspect. The high school I went to was a little bit bigger. Your standard problems for a high school sort of thing, that was fairly standard.
Now, were you a good student, Coops? Were you, like, academically, were you getting good grades consistently in high school?
That it fluctuated, and I think it did with a lot of kids. And it was very much on the teacher. So the classes where I engaged with the teacher, I did all right. And then there was the classes where I just didn't, like, we clashed. And I actually got kicked out of some of those classes, but not the school. I just had to sit on the outside. And there was a group of us just self-learning. And in the end, we actually did better on the outside because we were just learning from the textbook.
Yeah, right.
So I did, but about year 11, I kind of disengaged, and after that, all my grades went down. I just wasn't interested in school, and I think I was just staying there because I didn't want to go get a job at that age or that stage, sort of thing. So I did year 11, year 12. I think it was around 21% on the old HSC. So I didn't qualify to go to university, nothing like that. And we had a family of tradesmen, sort of thing. Like everyone, all my uncles, my old man, they were all bricklayers. My brother went off, became a plumber, so it was just a blue collar family. So I figured I'd go get a trade. So I went and did cabinet making or shop fitting and detail joiner, which I kind of had an interest in at the time. But then after a while, that kind of became fairly monotonous, and I was just really curious and interested in going doing something that kind of tested me a lot more, and just provided a little bit sort of more stimulation in my environment, sort of thing, gave me something to sort of get out of bed for, I suppose. So I kind of did my apprenticeship, and then from there went and joined the army because it was something I was interested in. And my brother had joined about 3 or 4 years before me, so I sort of knew a little bit about that. So he kind of got my interest, and then I went down that pathway.
So your brother, this is an older brother?
Yeah, so he's 4 years older than me. So like when you look at backyard sport, like I never won anything growing up. Like a game of cricket, I'd go in and bat for 5 minutes and sort of get my 10 wickets, and then he'd be in all afternoon, sort of thing. So I used to get towed up a lot playing sport. Yeah, but when you're a kid, that's just how it is. You know what I mean? Like you're not too concerned about it.
Yeah. And so did your brother, I didn't know that, so did your brother, what did he join? Did he join the infantry as well, or trade?
Yeah, so he joined the infantry, and then he ended up, it was in 4R, which became 2 Commando, sort of thing. So he was there when I think it first separated from 2-4 and stayed on, did the Commando, and he was one of the early Commandos in there.
Wow.
But he sort of, I can't remember what year it was, but he did probably, 6 years, 8 years, and then kind of went off to do something else.
Yeah. Awesome, man. All right, what a thank you for painting that picture of the upbringing and that sort of stuff, and particularly the parts, the early childhood and being out till dark, and then just enough time to get into trouble, but also the ability to get yourself out of it, and knowing that mum and dad were there, mum and dad, and just that background around there. It sounds like a very hard-working family, particularly from both your mum and your dad. But did your dad ever take you out bricklaying with him at any time?
Yeah. There's a reason.
Some free labour?
Yeah, when I went and became, it was for pocket money. So
he did.
Like if I wanted something, he goes, all right, well, let's go and I'll pay you to come labouring. And there's a reason why I didn't become a bricklayer's labourer as an apprentice. That's tough work. Like my hat's off to those guys, especially during the winter. But he used to go and do that with him. And then he went into another job, which I sort of went in and worked a little bit around weekends. Sort of thing. But when you spoke about values earlier, in our house we had really strong value systems, sort of thing. So I remember early on there was sort of a bit of discipline around understanding those values, and then as we got older it was sort of a lot more discussion around it, sort of thing. But we were really big on sort of having good values and just being good people.
Yeah, awesome, beautiful, man. I'm just making notes of some of the stuff that you mentioned as well, so appreciate that, man. That's really cool. I love how you've sort of painted that picture of getting towed up by your big brother. How many siblings did you have? Obviously, your big brother. Were there any other siblings?
I had a younger sister.
Sort
of thing. So, just the 3 of us.
Yep, 3 of you. Okay.
Which I think back then was probably a pretty standard family.
Yeah, and so I'm assuming both you and your big brother are fairly protective of your baby sister.
A little bit, not overly, sort of thing. So, like, she grew up with 2 brothers. We both went and joined the army, so it's not as though, we didn't give her a hard time growing up, sort of thing.
Yeah,
if she wanted to get involved in sport, she had to sort of keep up a little bit. So I guess she sort of grew up competing against us, so she knew how to sort of handle herself, sort of thing. So,
Awesome. And what sports were you? So obviously, I know about the rugby, having the privilege to play with you whilst we were in the unit. But what were you playing whilst you were growing up? Was it rugby as well, through school and high school and that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so I was playing soccer a lot when I was really little. And I think I was more guided into that than chose that. So I played that for a while, and then I took a break where I wasn't playing any formal sport. So it was mostly just school sport, mostly just exploring stuff, playing on my own of an afternoon, that sort of thing. And then I think it was early teenage years, I got into rugby league, which I was always really interested in. I just had to convince mum to let me go and play contact sport, and I can still remember that phone call between her and the old man for the first training session, trying to convince her.
Tell us about it.
So the training was on, and she just was sort of said, unless he says yes, it's not going to happen. And then thankfully he rang. So I was trying to manipulate that conversation between them to convince him, and he was happy for me to go do it. She just sort of wanted to make sure that everything would be fine.
Yeah.
She had reason to be sceptical of it because I broke my ankle that year, I think about 6 or 7 games in. So like, ultimately she was right. But then I came back from that and played probably another 6 or 7 years until I joined the army sort of thing. But I guess like all young kids, my ambition was to play professional rugby league. Just the area I grew up in, there was just so many talented young kids that I just never got a look in. And when I look back, I think a lot of it probably wasn't so much around talent. It was just at that stage I didn't understand what work ethic was, sort of thing. So like I don't know, to me it's intriguing that the person I was then wouldn't have done what I've done now, sort of thing. So I think, from those sort of mid to late teenage years, I've learnt a lot. Like even the person that turned up to selection wasn't the person that was playing rugby league.
Yeah, right. That's awesome. That's so good to hear, because I want to delve into that as we go on this conversation and our catch up here, and hearing your experiences. So those are some really good points that you've just touched on here. And I've heard you speak about your curiosity and stuff, and I actually heard some of that as you were speaking in another podcast about your curiosity. And it's interesting when you mentioned Airborne Battalion 3RAR that you chose that intentionally, which I guess in my head sort of ties in with some of the stuff that you do now, this human performance under pressure and all those sorts of things, because you didn't like heights. Was that right? Did I hear that right?
That's right. And I specifically chose it for one of those reasons, because I just wanted to take that fear on. But like even taking on your fear still has a context, you know what I mean? So like there's still areas where, like if I have to have a really difficult discussion with my partner, like I'd rather jump out of a plane than go, you know what I mean? So
I hear you.
Like this is the thing, like like we'll get into it later, I'm assuming, but a lot of the research shows, a lot of the stuff I'm looking at is that it has context, you know what I mean? So like taking on a fear of heights is a completely different context and almost a different process than, something else that makes you uncomfortable. But as far as taking on sort of physical pain and those sort of things, I've never been too concerned about that. I've always been comfortable with that, where, sort of probably more emotional things is probably a bit more of a challenge, and I've had to sort of build those skills over the years. But the airborne thing was a lot around getting over that fear of heights and just the curiosity. Like the idea of jumping out of a plane really excited me, and I didn't want a fear of heights or anything like that to get in the way.
Awesome.
So I sort of went off and did it.
Yeah. And so, sorry, Dan, I missed. Whereabouts did you grow up? What was the name of the area, the town, or the?
So it was the Lower Blue Mountains outside of Sydney, sort of thing. So it was kind of, for anyone familiar with that region, it's kind of around Kurrajong, sort of thing. So like where I played rugby league was in the Penrith catchment system. So, the Panthers got a really, really strong junior program out there, and it's always been strong.
Man, awesome. Thanks for sharing that and touching on that as well. And yeah, we're definitely going to come back to some of those points that you just spoke about then. And I guess this might be the start of that segue into it. And I'd love it if you wouldn't mind speaking, Coops, about your journey into the SAS. So you're in battalion, you're in 3RAR, Airborne Battalion with that capability. And it's only, 3 years there before you decide that you're going to do selection?
Yeah, so I turned up with the intention. It was just trying to work out, because you get told, and like you sort of, battalions are funny places as to who you listen to and what guidance you take. Yeah. But people go, you need to be here for 4 years, 5 years, and some go, just spend a year here and go for it. Doesn't matter. Yeah. Sort of thing. So it was probably around 2.5 years, and the selection process the application process came up. So I put my application in, and then I went and did the barrier test, which was one of the evolutions where it was the 3-day barrier.
Yep.
Where you sort of go do your testing, you do physical stuff, and then you do like a NAVEX, I think, and then a day similar to Lucky Dip. So I went and did that, and then Timor started, or deployed into Timor. So I went to Timor in 99 into 2000, which was that selection period. So I actually requested not to do selection. Yep. And then I went back and did the barrier test the next year, and did the selection in 2001.
And that was so you could deploy, right?
Yeah, I was deployed at the time.
Yeah.
Just
Gotcha.
Because nothing had happened in so long, I figured that selection will always be there.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I was young enough, a year doesn't matter.
Yep.
So I thought I'll stay on the deployment. there's probably that fear that if you go now, you'll never get that chance again, and you might miss out on something. It wasn't a great deployment. I wouldn't have missed anything, but I sort of stayed there and then came back and did selection the following year.
Awesome. And so and with that application and your process, when you've gone through to go to SASR, was it straight to, and just one step before that, am I right? The barrier testing, because that was something I didn't know about when I got there. Obviously there was barrier testing and stuff that was happening, but were they using that as because it was quite expensive from what I understood to send people over to Perth and then do the cull and 40-50% withdraw or whatever, and then they get sent back. So is that part of why the barrier testing was happening?
Yeah, it was. This was an early evolution to it. So I think the year before, the one I was going to do when I was in Timor was actually on the East Coast.
Right.
And that was I think that was the only combined one they did at the time. And it was, from what I can gather, it was a little bit clunky. It still got the people that it would always get through. The process was very similar. It was just a few hiccups with it.
Right.
But I think the idea of the barrier was, traditionally, I think they used to put everyone on a military plane, fly them across to Perth. They'd do the 3.2, and the people that didn't pass would get back on the plane and fly back home.
And there'd be easily a few hundred, right? On this.
Yeah, like they'd get 200 people turn up, I think.
Yeah.
And then they wouldn't do it. So then they thought, okay, well, let's cull it down a little bit. So when I did my selection after the barrier, there was actually only 31 people turned up for selection.
Right, yeah.
And then that dwindled to 6 people. So the last week with 6 people, there was nowhere to hide. Like, there was more DS than there was candidates. So they got a really good look. But only having 6 really complicated the reinforcement cycle.
Yeah.
So then they sort of went back to a system where they do now, where they travel around, do that testing, and then they might get anywhere from 80 to 120 people, I think they'll sort of take from year to year. Like, it fluctuates a little bit, but the end result doesn't really seem to change a great deal.
Awesome. Man. And so where did your drive, because you'd done the carpentry, you were curious, and I think, did you mention was that the intent was always to give the SAS a crack, or why was that? Where did that stem from?
That was well before I joined the army. So, like, I watched a lot of, like, I grew up with almost Clint Eastwood, John Wayne, as surrogate dads on TV type of thing. So, like, I was watching a lot of that, and, the Schwarzenegger movies, the Stallone movies, and then you started to see the Navy SEAL movies come through not long after that. And that really intrigued me, because that was probably more relative to what I was doing than sort of old Westerns and stuff, or what's going on now. And then I seen the stuff about the British SAS and their sort of hostage rescue stuff, and I got really intrigued in it. And then I found out that Australia had a version of that. I guess it was just a real fascination with, who are these people? Where do they come from? And at that time it was almost, I couldn't relate to those people.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you wonder, where do they grow up? Do these people just come from normal society? Like, you think of them almost as that gap between normal humans and superhumans. These guys sit in there. And then I sort of, I don't know, like, I've kind of come up with an idea or a decision, and then I just slowly move towards it, just sort of biting piece after piece. And then you sort of join the army, and that you start to see a pathway to it. Then you put in your application for selection, because you think, I've got nothing to lose here, I can give it a go. And then you start to slowly close in on it, and then at some point you realise, what, this isn't actually as unachievable as I thought. And then when I got onto selection, it was sort of, all right, well, the one thing I can choose here is to not leave. So I'm not going to leave. If they cart me off because I'm no good, I can live with that. If I get injured and get carried off, I can live with that. But I'm not going to be able to live with pulling or withdrawing on my own account. So that was the one thing that I had control of, and I kind of just took it hour by hour, day by day, and then, before you know, or not before you know it, but eventually you get to the end, because it seems like a really long time at the time. Yeah. And then, as you do that interview and they congratulate you and you're in, and then you sort of realise, what, these are just normal people in here. But it really grew from that early fascination as to, what would it be like to be in there? Would I be able to get in there? Like, do I have what it takes to pass through that? And do I have what it takes to actually perform in that environment? So, it's just sort of really driven by basically curiosity and fascination around it.
Man, that's awesome. It's really cool to hear too, because I've had Nick on and Ryan Wilson and Gads that they've been on and spoken a bit as well. And it's really cool to hear the different mindsets and stuff leading up to. I think Nick is one that Nick Caldwell stands out to me in my mind because
Yeah.
he was really drawn by the Commando Arnold Schwarzenegger stuff, and that's what drew him to the Special Forces. So, and he wouldn't be alone. I know there's a couple of others that I've chatted with as well, but hearing your side and that piece there, like these people come from another planet or something. Did they land here from a spaceship?
like
and then
it's just you sort of look at it and go, you know what, like I'm not that, like
Yeah.
and you're curious as to how did they grow up, where did they come from, and then you get there and you realize that they're just normal folk.
Yeah.
What I mean, they're just a little bit more motivated, willing to put up with a little bit more and do a bit more, and here they all are.
Yeah, awesome, man. I love that that explanation and your perceptions of what you identified, and then your growth into that and move into that, which is probably a nice move right now, because we'll delve more into your top. Actually, I want to ask you first, how many do you remember how many started on your, like, the selection proper, not the barrier testing? So on day one you've got X amount of people. How many started? How many of yous finished, if you remember? And then how many of yous did they accept? Because there's usually always a cull as well at the end, even though you complete. Do you remember those rough numbers?
So they had a massive cull before we got to Perth. So I think it was 31 that turned up in Perth.
Right.
So I think it was 80 on that 3-day barrier, and then from there they cut it to about 31.
Gotcha.
So as usual, like a decent percentage went in the first week, and then there wasn't too many, and then we got to the last phase, and I think from memory there might have been 8. One withdrew on the first day of that, and we didn't want him to go basically because we just needed the extra person to lift stuff around. It's like, it was a little bit selfish on our behalf. Like, no, hang around. Like, we actually need the extra person, because we were really struggling, because I think we had enough staff planning on a bigger section than what we'd actually turned up on that last week, sort of thing. So we got through there, and then they took 3 officers and 3 diggers from that. I think one of the diggers was questionable, but there was only 3 of us that finished. So they took him anyway, and he didn't get through the reinforcement cycle. He ended up sort of getting booted, for lack of a better word, on some of the terminal courses. But we only did half a reinforcement cycle, and they ran a second selection that year. And from that, they got, I think, maybe 16, which brought it up to sort of the usual sort of 20 to 24 that will come through on average. So, and then we're able to do the full cycle on the back of that.
Man, because that's like the numbers that you just mentioned there. I was like, that's similar to the numbers that they'd get through finishing the NZ one, because it'd be hard to run and they still run the cycle here. So hearing that, and then it sounds like they topped up then once they had another 16 or so. Then you guys combined, and then
we did our cycle a little bit back to front sort of thing.
Right.
So we did a few of the SIG course and these things early, because there was only sort of 3 or 4 of us at that stage. So I think 2 of the officers had to return back to their old units to finish some stuff off.
Right.
So we sort of got 4 people doing courses. So they just put us in smaller courses, and then they ran an insertion one with some other people that need to pick up their insertion skills. So we didn't get any choice. We just got put into mobility, and then we did what we could, and then on the back of that next selection they did. So we did ours in the summer, and then they did one sort of late winter, which was probably pretty tough, I reckon, because it was pretty cold.
Yeah.
So I supported that, and I was like, I think I would have preferred to do the summer one, to be honest. And then we did all those more terminal courses on the back of that.
Gotcha.
And then the guys who had been on the first half, so the 2 of us that had completed that much of the Rio from that first selection, and then the guys who were already qualified in some of those skills went to the squadron after the 12 months I'd been there. Then the guys from that second cycle went through and did the next 6 months, whatever it was, of their reinforcement cycle. So it was sort of a little bit clunky, but they're really good at making things work in that place. So they just sort of kept rolling on, and then I think the next year they changed it a little bit so that they got more numbers coming through, so they didn't have the repeat of that same problem again.
Yeah, that sounds like it would have been clunky to work through in there.
Yeah, well, 2 selections is hugely resource intensive.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like, you think with the work cycle and training cycles that they have, their operational cycles, like you just can't afford 2 of those things each year. So they just said, okay, this isn't working. We trialled it. Let's go back and find a better way.
And that's good. And that'll come out too. That's been one of the hallmarks and traits that I've noticed anyways, particularly speaking with guys like Moff and that sort of thing as well, and now yourself as well, who'll be able to speak to some of that as we get to it. But where did you end up going? What was your insertion where you ended up? Can you tell us?
Yeah, so I initially went into mobility, and I left the reinforcement cycle to go straight to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So during my cycle was when 9/11 happened. So I can still remember the day, like we were in the middle of a combat course, and then we sort of, that night it happened, we were all watching, then the next day we turned up at work and things just weren't the same as the day before. You know what I mean? Like people are scurrying around. A few of the instructors are now missing from the course, you know, they're off doing other things. So we sort of went through, and then I finished and went away with the second rotation, which was 3 Squadron at the time. So I came straight off my cycle and straight into Afghanistan with one of the mobility platoon or mobility troops.
Man, and this is good. Like, it's fine. I'll come back to some of these other questions later. But can you take us? Can you talk us through? Because this is a question that people often want to know or ask about. What was that feeling like for you? Obviously, you remember where you were when 9/11 happened. You come to work the next day, things aren't quite the same. As you mentioned, those things that just took place. Did you start to get a feeling or have a feeling that this is where the rubber's going to meet the road now? Like, we're heading off, like jobs going to be on soon?
You definitely see the opportunity there or the potential for something to happen, but because of Australia, it's variability in committing to these things. Like some things they commit to, some things they don't. You just never know what our role is going to be, if any. So you sort of, there's that kind of excitement, sort of fascination around it, and probably a little bit of apprehension as well. You know, you're thinking, you know, if I get sent to Afghanistan, these guys don't really have a history of getting rolled up easy. You know what I mean? Like, this is going to be a simple gig. So you're kind of just waiting, and you can see the wheel starting to turn, and then you sort of, and there's always rumours, like rumours are rife everywhere, and there's these little rumours kicking around, and then you start to see people actually gearing up, and you realise, all right, well, we're going to commit early on, but you never know what it looks like beyond that. So everyone's kind of scrambling for that first rotation because you just don't know whether there's going to be a second and a third or how long it's going to go for. So you're sort of, just kind of could see the potential, just waiting to see what came about. But for where I was, I still had a few courses to get through yet. So my reality was still, I need to pass these, otherwise I'm not going anywhere. I'm going back to 3RR and probably end up in Timor in 12 months.
And so when did the decision come to you? Because your cycle wasn't finished before you were deployed, right?
No, that's right. So for me, I'd finished all the courses.
Oh, okay.
Because I'd done all the front end ones, and then I did the back end ones, and
Gotcha.
I'd done, because I came in para qualified, I didn't have to do the parachute course, which was
Sweet.
the course everyone went on to when I deployed, sort of thing. So I think there was me and one other. So there was the 2 off my cycle, and then I think one from the cycle afterwards who came from the reserve commando. So he had a number of the qualifications that they needed. So he just lacked an insertion, so he came along as well, because they were looking for a few more people, and I was like, looked at us and like, okay, well, you guys have got the qualifications we need so far. Pretty much we're fully qualified, so we went off.
Awesome.
And joined 3 Squadron.
Wicked. And I think, because I remember the cycle that I was on was a little bit roundabout as well. We had deployed, but then we come back and we had to do the CQB, and you were one of the instructors along with Lockie and a few of the other guys, which I won't mention because I'm not sure if they're still serving, but you were one of the instructors on my CQB, I remember, with our groups that were coming through. So it was a little bit, but it doesn't sound like as disjointed or as your cycle was. And I guess leading up to, or coming back to one of the questions now, so you're getting that call to wheels up and head off and deploy. Were you married by then? When did you meet? Because that was one of my next. When did you meet? Did you meet your wife before you went on selection, or whilst you were in the unit?
So I met whilst I was in the unit. So I'd been there for around about 2.5 to 3 years.
Oh, all right. Yeah.
Sort of thing. So, when we met, she was visiting Perth from Sydney. So she had a friend who was in the military. And then we sort of met. Then she was back and forth a little bit from work. So we kind of just were doing the long distance thing.
Yeah.
And then her work was expanding, and there was an opportunity for her to come to Perth. So we thought, all right, well, let's see how this works out. So personally, I think it's a positive thing that I was already in there, because when she met me, she already knew what my life looked like, sort of thing. So like, she's like, okay, well, this is what our relationship's going to be. This is what life's like. Where sometimes I question, if guys come across with a family, then it throws their whole routine out. You know what I mean? So like, they some adjust really well, but my opinion, and this is my opinion only, is that some don't. Like, it sort of throws out their cycle too much, or it creates too much chaos, that the adjustment's really difficult for them, and I think that can be problematic.
Yeah, 100%. And that's cool. And I know your wife's name, but I'm not mentioning it because she's in a bit of a tactical role these days, isn't she?
Yeah, so we did a complete swap. So she got into a tactical role, and I was like, fine, I'll go look after the kids and relax for a few years. Because she'd been really good. Like, she had her own pathway. Like, as you know, she went and opened her own gym. She sort of kept herself busy and doing all this other stuff. But it was always still, if I was away, then it was more about what I was doing had a priority almost in the relationship. So she was kind of always adjusting to what I was doing. Yeah. And she was really good about that. And then her opportunity came up, and I just said straight away, look, you've done everything for so long. Now I'll go and do everything, and you can go and do this sort of thing. So she's gone off, and she's really enjoying it and making a really good opportunity out of it. So
beautiful. That's great to hear. And I want to ask you, because I like to ask the guests this here as well. So this is your opportunity. If I'm lucky enough, hopefully I might have the opportunity to have your sweetheart on this podcast to hear her side. But how did you guys meet, and who asked who?
So we met. So it was actually at the Gratwick Club, which is the bar on base for those that don't know. Yeah. So it was a farewell for one of the guys who went away into the private sector and then came back years later. So we're up there having a few drinks, and the friend she had kind of knew these guys, so they come up for a bit and then they went off. And then we met them out hours later, and we just kind of bumped into each other at the bar and just sort of started chatting. And then I think she gave me a phone number just on the back of the conversation that we had. And then
did you ask for it?
I can't fully remember. I think I alluded to it, and then she gave it to me, sort of thing. But it was on a AFL Grand Final weekend, so everyone in Perth's out all weekend. So then we ended up the next night kind of meeting up again, and then that was more by chance. But then I organised the following night, sort of thing. So for 3 nights in a row, we met up, and then she went back home, and then not long after, I was heading back to Sydney, because my family was still on the East Coast, and I'd organised to sort of see her for a little bit in Sydney on the way down to my family and on the way back, and then it was just sort of opportunities to catch up, and that kind of just grew from there. So
awesome. And you touched on, because obviously your spouse, your wife, is very, very capable as well, and as you mentioned, she opened her own gym, CrossFit box, or with regards to the term that was being used and stuff there. I'm not sure if it's still used like that today in terms of these CrossFit boxes and those sorts of things. And yourself, with regards to, which I've got the list here, and thank you for getting back to me with some of the stuff. So this will sort of touch and delve into some of that, but I'll go to the CrossFit stuff first. Obviously, you qualified for CrossFit Regionals in 2011. This is just some background here, and again, it's not stuff that people like you that I know are going to go around and go, I've done this and done that, but it's pretty incredible, and it'll help give some context, I believe, for our listeners to go, now I understand why we want to do a part 2 with regards to yourself. So CrossFit Regionals CrossFit Regionals participating in 2011, is that right?
Yeah.
CrossFit Games Master qualified 2016-17. Those feats in and of themselves, I think, and it made me laugh. And again, this just, to me, shows the humility that comes through on you. When I was listening to your podcast with Aaron Zimmerman, you said, managed to get through these CrossFit regionals, and then the talented athletes came along, and then I just sort of got moved off to the side. But man, I cracked up. Sorry, go.
That's honest. Like, the guys that came through 2 or 3 years later were so much better than what I was, sort of thing. So I think I was probably mid-30s, maybe a little bit beyond that. I can't specifically remember. It would have just been over like 35, 36. And then within 2 years, like the ability of the people that were coming through was well beyond what I could have done in my day, sort of thing. So I was just around in the early days, sort of thing.
You
made myself
awesome.
Feel good, and then I got moved on.
You definitely did awesome. And obviously the ultra endurance stuff, obviously racing the planet, those 4 deserts, 250 kilometers. You've done the Kep Ultra, which is a 100-kilometer event, the Yukon Arctic Ultra, 430 miles, 700 kilometers, and I'll talk about what my question is when I get to this after.
Yep.
The Iditarod Trail, hopefully I'm saying that right, invitational, 350 miles, so 560 kilometers. And from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, you have to do that or show that you can complete that first before you can go on and do the 1,000-mile one.
Yep, that's right. It's a qualifier. So like,
Is
it's
that
probably
right?
one of the world's longest qualifiers. But
What's
yeah, you
happening
just
here?
have to.
So it's saying camera is disabled due to slow internet connection. Can you see me still?
Yeah, I still got you fine.
Yeah. Okay. I can't see you on here, but that's fine. Sorry, was I right with that? And I can still hear you too. That
Yeah.
Iditarod Trail Invitational 350-mile one, was that the you have to complete that first before you can go on and do the big one?
Yeah, that's right. So it's a qualifying event. So yeah, you have to prove that, because it gets really isolated,
Yeah.
really isolated after that. So you have to prove that you can survive out there on your own under those conditions, sort of thing. Because you know what, losing someone out there is probably not a great business plan for them, as I sort of say. So
Yeah.
yeah, they just want to make sure that you can survive.
Wow, unreal. And I'll give the dates of these a bit later on or after this. The Glasshouse Ultra, 100 kilometre, another 100 kilometre, and then obviously the big one in just this year, the Iditarod Trail Invitational, 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometres. So from 2011 through to 2022, no signs of slowing down and any of that sort of stuff with the ultra endurance stuff that you do and keeping healthy and well physically and mentally and all that sort of stuff, on top of the work that you're doing, on top of being, you know, a husband and a father, provider and protector. Where do you find, or how did you find the time to be able to do those, particularly back in 2011, while still serving at what then just skyrocketed to really high, well, probably even before then, probably from about 2006, 2007, I guess, the operational tempo of the unit just skyrocketed from what I could see. How were you able to still go do those events whilst while still being in the unit?
Yeah, so I'd always been physically active, sort of thing, like even
Yeah.
from a young age and everything. And I think a lot of, because I didn't follow a lot of the training to get into selection, but I think I just developed the base, thankfully, over years of being active, that I could just get through the minimum requirement and then I could just grind it out from there. So I always kept a pretty decent level of fitness, and then when CrossFit sort of turned up, and it was around about the same time that sort of Gym Jones became really popular, which I
Yeah.
think was sort of around 2007, 2008 when we started seeing it.
Yeah.
It's probably a bit popular before that, but we weren't real internet savvy back then.
Yeah.
A bit late on the uptake. So like it was sort of, and guys were just challenging each other with these workouts sort of thing, and then we're sort of seeing who could do them, and then so I was kind of just playing around with them by chance that you end up sort of getting better and better at it. Well, not by chance, but you get better and better at it. And then when sort of CrossFit, I think when it first started out with Australian regionals, it was a little bit of a different format. In the first couple of years, I didn't worry about it. And then I just happened to qualify for the one in 2011, which I think was the actual first organised qualifier. And I went over in a team because I just didn't think as an individual I'd be able to cut it. And I don't think I would have at that level to any reasonable ability, because my gymnastics was probably, it's always been average, but it just wasn't going to be able to get me anywhere. And then on the back of that, I was sort of studying, and then I did a couple of rotations which seen me away during the online qualifying period or through the Open.
Right.
So for the next couple of years, I actually didn't really do the Open.
Yeah.
I think in 2012 I was at altitude. And I think from memory it was a 7-minute burpee, so about 3 minutes I just cut it. I was like, I'm done with this. It's like, I'm going nowhere. Like, there was no point. It was just suffering for the sake of suffering. So I kind of just played around with it for a few years and then managed to keep a pretty good fitness level. And then when I hit Masters, and I knew the first couple of years I had a good chance because I understand the relative age effect. So, you know, at 40, you're competing against 45-year-olds, and that kind of does matter.
Yeah.
So I thought, all right, the first year I'll give it a good nudge, and I was in a position where I could, so I went through into the qualifier, and then I think finished somewhere in the top 100 out of that, but
Awesome.
not good enough to get to the games. So I'm working on the theory that if I can keep fit till 60, everyone else will drop away and I can get to the games. Sort of thing. And then you've got all that endurance work that you do at work, sort of thing. So I had a really good volume of endurance, and the ultra endurance stuff just came about by chance. That was two of us just talking smack one night, and we came across the marathon to subs, and we kind of challenged each other. It's like, oh, you couldn't do that, sort of thing. And then a similar one came to Australia, so I thought I'm going to give this a run. And then from there, some of it was stuff I chose, other of it was just being baited by guys to go and do stuff, which is how I found myself in the Yukon for the first time.
Oh, hard case, man. Thanks for sharing that. And I just, it reminds me it's a really highly competitive environment being in the regiment, and then you've got within the squadrons, and then within the troops and all that sort of stuff, and then squadron versus squadron sort of stuff, or mentality and those sorts of things. But I wanted to ask, did you stay mobility the whole time, or did you go to water, or?
So coming back from Afghanistan, I'd always wanted to go water because, again, I'd never really spent much time in the ocean, and it was just something that I wasn't comfortable with. And I thought, like, it's going to be a really bad decision, sort of comfort-wise, because it's going to be hard work. I'm not going to love it, and I don't think I ever really loved it. But I wanted to do a water course, and then when we came back from Afghanistan, they were running one, so I went and did that, and then transitioned into the water troops after that, which is where I spent the rest of my time. I really enjoyed the water troops because, from my perspective, they were really tight troops, sort of thing. I think a lot of that was around the desurfacing that was required, just all the work outside of inserting and that sort of thing. And they always tell everyone it's the hardest way to go about doing things. Like maybe it is, maybe it isn't, sort of thing. But they weren't shy on telling everyone, sort of thing. But you spend a lot of time with each other, kind of looking after team gear. So it's sort of. It's more about everyone else and less about yourself, and that becomes almost one of your values, sort of thing. So I just really enjoyed being in that environment because I'm very close. Guys are always there to help you out and that sort of thing. So I thought it was just a really good place to spend the next 15, 16 years, sort of thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, to your point, like water operators, in my view anyway, that was the hardest insertion skill, in my opinion anyway. And back here in NZ, the reason why I chose that first, never got to go on to do it because of the mischief I got up to here, but was because I'd heard that it was the hardest out of all the insertions. So I wanted to do that sort of similar, I guess, mindset in many ways, but to know, and people might, vehicle mounted and or free fall might not like to admit that, but I understood that, even knowing that and having a small taste of the small boating course and the amount of deservicing and the work and stuff that was involved in that, a very small taste of what a water operator's role is like. And so I can understand when you're saying about how close and how tight they are. And it is, as much as that might hurt the free fallers and the mobility troops, water operators are definitely different. And you're right, they weren't shy in telling the rest of us.
And everyone gave it back, sort of thing. I think everyone just looked at wateries as a bunch of arrogant pricks, sort of thing. It was a bit of humour around it, sort of thing. But they used to talk about, or everyone used to consider the assault swimmers course as second selection because it was just so long, and the hours were huge, and it was just so much work involved in it. And everyone hates diving. You get to a point where it's like, I don't want to get in the water again. And then, you wake up, you got 3 swims that day, and 3 swims all week. So that, it was never fun. It was great environment, but, I used to think that the ocean hated me. Like every time you go near the water, it just makes life really difficult for you because it's just, it can be a really hard place to work. But I also think it developed a lot of character attributes in me that I think that have served me really well after that. It was just that being exposed to it, and then just being around some of the real veteran and experienced water operators, because there's a really long list of guys there who, when you think about, like, they're just really good role models in that environment. So it was sort of that component as well, I think, really worked a lot to kind of put me on the right path, because I was still fairly young, fairly immature when I got to the unit. But getting those right guys and sort of helping them mentor me and put me on the right path, I think sort of paid off hugely as I then went on to do my own things and understand how to develop others, sort of thing. So, like, it's just, whether it was kind of a little bit of luck or whatever it was, it just seemed to work out really well for me.
That's awesome, Coops. You mentioned character and traits, and then that's actually one of my questions, or the next one on here. And I wanted to ask you, what has been in your time, and we'll come back to some more questions around your time in the unit, obviously, but this ties in with it. What's been the most, or what would you say is the most important characteristic or trait to you that an SF operator needs to have, or that that you recommend that they have, or somebody that, what is that to you, the most important or characteristic or trait that you valued most?
Yeah, it's really hard to narrow down. But I guess within that context, I
Yeah.
guess having the sort of agility and flexibility to understand what's required within the situation you're in, sort of thing. So, and I tried to take away as much as I could from different people that was relevant to different circumstances. So
Gotcha.
early on, I was failing to establish a caving ladder on side of a ship,
Right.
and the team leader we had was very much hard line sort of thing. Like, he knew how to get the job done, and he sort of letting me go because I think he was happy to sort of let me struggle with it. And then he got to the point where he just couldn't bear to watch me anymore, sort of flounder around on the surface. So he just grabbed it and got it sorted. And then we sort of finished the task, and then, he sort of give me a debrief. And it was just sort of very much that, in this job, it doesn't matter how you do it. You have to find a way to get the job done. Like, there's no quitting, there's no sort of cutting back. It's just, it has to happen. We have to find a way, sort of thing. So he sort of imparted some attributes into me that kind of said, okay, well, you know what? It doesn't matter how difficult it is, it doesn't matter how uncomfortable you are, until you have no resources left to contribute, you have to keep fighting, sort of thing. Like, you just have to do everything you can to get the job done. So that was kind of something. Then you're in situations later on in your career where, you're overseas, it's 50 degrees, you're out of water, like, you're in this really long, sustained situation, and, everything about you, or everything in your head saying, I just want to sit under that tree for 30 minutes in the shade. But it's like, you know what? I have to keep moving forward, sort of thing. So, like, there's that skill that works within that environment, but then it may not serve you somewhere else, sort of thing. So I think it's understanding that flexibility. Then there was other guys who sort of showed me the human side of leadership, about sort of treating people specific to who they are and getting the best out of them, which that works in some environments, but then others, you just have to get them going, sort of thing. So for me, I think it was kind of learning that agility and that flexibility around trying to understand what approach you needed to bring to that situation with who you had in it. So it was a lot of understanding the dynamics of interaction, I suppose. So, and for me, that's experience. Like, you get that wrong a lot early on, and then you start to learn how to do it based on, seeing the impacts of your decisions, the impacts of how you talk to somebody and that sort of thing. So you sort of kind of do something, observe, and go, okay, well, I don't speak to that person like that again, because this is not how our interaction works. Like, he's just not going to respond to that way. Then someone else, might be completely different. So for me, it was kind of a lot around that.
Awesome, man. What a great explanation and really great examples, that agility and flexibility, and being able to apply that to the context or to the individuals. Yeah, those are great points.
And you make a lot of mistakes doing it. Like, it's a lot of experience. Like, you've really got to understand people. You've got to understand situations. Like, the first time you go into it, it's like, all right, I have to make decisions. I have to do things. So the first time I led, it was like, all right, I got to suck at this before I understand how to get better at it. So it's like, let's hope there's no really bad consequences of me not being that competent at the moment, sort of thing. And then, you just learn from mistakes, and you just keep sort of pivoting and adjusting as you need.
Awesome, mate. I wanted to not jump back, but come back to you and your sweetheart. And obviously you're deploying on operations regularly. And with regards to your spouse and then heading off, did you start having children while you were still serving towards the end of your career, or right in the middle, sort of?
It was towards the end.
Towards the end, okay.
So our first was born around 2012. So I still had, I think, 1 or 2 trips after that.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. So I had a trip when she was pregnant, and I came back, and we sort of had our son. So I was lucky enough that I was around for the birth of my children, because I know there's a lot of guys who weren't, and that's a difficult period, sort of thing. So I think some of them was by choice at times.
Yeah.
But yeah, we sort of, I don't know, we kind of delayed it as long as we could, because we were both busy, and we thought, if we bring children in within this, then we just can't give them what they need. Like, we just cannot provide what they need. And then you get to that point where it's like, all right, well, we just got to push some of this other stuff aside and now get us into a position where we can have some kids. So ours was very much planned.
Gotcha.
If we had them earlier, we had them earlier. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't that we were anti-kids or anything. It was just we were trying to get to a position where it was going to be as best we could get it. And I don't think you ever really reach that position. You get to a point where you're like, you know what, this is as good as it gets.
Yeah.
You know, let's just get the kids. So, yeah, I was in the period where it was starting to draw down with the amount of sort of deployment time, the amount of training time, those sort of things. So it was kind of worked out pretty well for them. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I wouldn't have waited much longer, I don't think.
Gotcha. And with your, obviously with the amount of deployments and stuff leading up to each one, how was that time between you and your sweetheart, between you and your spouse leading up to? Was there a conversation that was had prior to every deployment? Was all your stuff in order and all that sort of thing? I assume it would be like the guys that I've spoken to, and that was probably their number one priority before heading off, making sure that things were going to be all right at home, as well as they could if the worst would happen. But how did that go down for you and your spouse with regards to your prep prior to heading away and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, so you deal with all that side of things. So, you know, you get your wheel squared away, you make sure that, you know, everything's covered. So there's issues aren't going to come up that don't need to come up, sort of thing. But it was always difficult. Like, it would be okay, you know that you're going to go, wife knows that I'm going to go, and you kind of pretend that it's not going to happen for a while, and then you kind of get about 3 weeks out or 2 weeks out, and then everyone knows it's about to happen, and there's almost a little bit of toing and froing around avoiding that conversation, sort of thing. You know, my wife wants me to reassure her that I'm coming home. I'm a realist, so I'm like, well, do you want me to lie or do you want me to not lie? You know, like, I don't know if I'm coming home. You know, but I think she just wanted a little bit of certainty that, you know, this wasn't going to be the last time she seen me when I left. So that last week I always found really uncomfortable. And I think at times you almost think to yourself, maybe I should give the date 3 weeks after I've left, and then like that morning go, oh yeah, by the way, I'm leaving today, not in 3 weeks. You're like, yeah, that's not really fair. But it was never comfortable. Like those last week, those last few days, even that last day before you go, like it's a really difficult time, I think, sort of thing. And I never enjoyed it. I know my wife never enjoyed it. Yeah. You never get better at it. You just kind of accept that that's what it is, sort of thing. But, you know, you try and make the most of it in that last week, but neither of you are in the mood to sort of do a huge amount of stuff. You know, you just sort of kind of just spend a bit of time with each other and try and make the most of it. And then, you know, off you go, and you sort of speak once a week sort of thing. And it's just, yeah, it's tough. Yeah. Like I've always felt for the partners at home, because even when I'm over there, I know what I'm doing. Like if I'm in base, I know I'm in base. If I'm out, I know I'm out. Yeah. I know I'm well trained. I know that we've got the upper hand. I know these guys legitimately aren't soldiers. Like most of them are just farmers that take arms or bear arms against people, you know, or they did some fighting against someone else previously. You know, we're well trained, we're professional, we're full time. You know, like everything's in our favour, and I know that. Where she's at home and she's got no idea what's going on. Like she goes into bed, no idea what I'm doing, this sort of thing. So, you know, it's much easier being there than it is being at home, I think, sort of thing. So, you know, to be honest, I'd prefer to be out there knowing what's going on than back here not knowing.
Yeah, gotcha, man. And thank you for articulating that as well, because I think that it really helps paint a picture. I know it does for many of the spouses and also for the operators in that as well, because it becomes, you've got so much happening when you're away, and you've got so many other things on, and people that are depending on you, your teammates and that sort of thing, or in your case when you're leading the team and that as well, that sometimes, you know, I've been guilty of just, my family is sort of sick, like they're a distant memory, or, you know, thoughts. They're not right at the forefront, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Like, there's times where sometimes it's almost like the simplicity of operations is that, like, you know their intent. Like, they've made their intent pretty clear. They know your intent. Like, there's no masquerading here, sort of thing. And then you don't have bills coming in. You know, you don't have all this other clutter that is in everyday life. So, like, to me, there's a lot going on, but there's almost a simplicity to it where you wake up, you know what you're going to be confronted with during that day. But then, and you kind of put home aside to a little bit. Like, you just, okay, I'll make my weekly phone call on this day, and then, you know, you do that, and then you're off back to work for the next week, sort of thing. And then as things progress, the phone calls got a little bit more regular. But yeah, back at home, they're dealing with everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and they're dealing with it on their own, sort of thing. So plus all that worry. So yeah, I don't know. Like
100%.
for me, it's a really difficult relationship to be in, sort of thing. And I can understand the pressure that it puts on partners and families and these sort of things. So, you know, like for me, people that are going into it really need to understand the pressure that is put on them in these situations.
And thank you for highlighting that as well, because that's really valuable for our listeners going through, and or those aspiring to go to the unit, following your footsteps and that sort of thing, and that as well, and for the spouses equally. You've touched on a heck of a lot of good points here. What I will say is, I'm glad you probably didn't pull it out last minute again. Oh, actually, we're going today. You might have ended up boarding the flight with a couple of black eyes from your wife instead.
I thought about it sometimes. I thought, I can't do that. You know, like I can't be that person, sort of thing. But yeah, like I've often said to my wife that, you know, as you sort of alluded to, like getting on and giving her perspective of it would be really interesting, because I could be completely wrong. You know what I mean? Like, you sort of talk a little bit, but you never truly understand what another person's thinking or what they've been through.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I didn't realise when I listened to my wife share some of her thoughts and perspectives of it, those were things that were just not even, they went straight over my head. I wasn't thinking about that at all, and I didn't realise how much of an impact it had. And so, yeah, just the feedback that she's received, or that we've received from her sharing that experience, and same with Harry's wife, Danielle, for sharing hers. It's powerful and it's incredible, and it's an open invitation for the spouses, but it's slow going at the moment, and that's fine. I understand.
I'd definitely encourage her. Like, one of the things that stood out for me was early on, we got engaged, and I dragged my feet for a while on the engagement. But yeah, there's a lot on, and like, it wasn't so much dragging feet, it's just that time goes really quick. And then I was away, and we had a particularly nasty casualty while we were away who come home. All the partners know about it. They don't know who it is at first. And, you know, you tell them, if you're not told early, it's okay. But they still worry, you know, was I there? Am I hurt? And no one's telling her, these sort of things. And I spoke to her a few days later, because, you know, you've got a job to do. You can't just rush off to the phone. So you sort of come back, and then, you know, you could hear it in her voice, just the concern sort of thing. And then she sort of, you know, she's like, oh, you know, I'm trying to plan, well, we've got a wedding coming up, you're over there, I don't know if you're going to come home, these sort of things. And you could just sort of feel or hear the fear in her voice, sort of thing, that, you know what I mean, like, we're trying to plan this life that she doesn't even know is going to exist in 3 months, sort of thing. So, and then, you know, you do your 10 minutes on the phone. There's a lot of silence in those conversations, because, you know, you just don't know what to say, you know, because the reality is, I know I'm going back out. I don't know if I'm going to come back from that one, sort of thing. So, you know, you try and reassure them, and then you go and you're sort of down for a couple of hours, but you just no idea what she goes away and thinks about for her next day, for that night, for the following week, sort of thing. Like, how many sleepless nights are on the back of that situation and that phone call, sort of thing. So, like, their perspective, I think, carries a lot of power with it.
100%. And thank you for speaking to that as well. You moved into a point here, particularly when you're speaking about the loss and stuff. And I was wondering if you wouldn't mind, without reliving those, you know, those moments, so to speak, with regards to the loss of, whether it's the loss of somebody during operations or during training, how have you been able to cope with that, for one? And what would be your advice in terms of what helped you be able to cope and move through to be able to progress? Because I would assume you still carry that with you every day. And that's extremely difficult, and only you know what that's like. But obviously you seem to be, at least from somebody outside looking in, very capable, very competent, very growth mindset focused, orientated in terms of being able to move forward. How did you process those sorts of moments when they've happened to you? And what would be your advice to help others who may be still struggling with those types of things, losing somebody, whether it's on ops or whether it's been through training accidents?
Yeah, so it's always a real tough one. And I'll start off by saying, I don't know whether I'd comfortably give advice. Because I think everyone's different. So then, like, I went about it my way, but that may not work for anybody. You know
Gotcha.
what I mean? It may work for others. So I think it's one of those things that, you know, it's very individually dependent, sort of thing. But I would say that the worst thing you can do is isolate yourself or start to exclude others from that process, because, you know, when we're in pain, the last thing we want to be is isolated. You know, but you see some people will do it, whether it's temporary or how long it lasts. But I sort of, where I grew up was sort of semi-rural, so there was a lot of car accidents out there when I was growing up. So
Alright.
I started experiencing burying sort of kids from school, like not really friends at first, but every now and then we get there on an assembly on Monday morning and they'd say, you know, such and such were killed in a
Alright.
car accident on the weekend, or, you know, playing around on their bikes, these sort of things. So
Yeah.
it wasn't regular, but it was enough that you start to get a little bit of exposure to it. And then, you know, I lost a couple friends in car accidents when I was younger. I was involved in a few car accidents, which were all stupidity based. Like, not one of them was not our fault out of stupidity. I wasn't the driver of any of them, so I sort of, not that I wasn't stupid, sort of thing. And then I lost a girlfriend, I think, when I was about 19 or 20, in a car accident through another. She was involved in a different vehicle car accident. I had nothing to do with it. And then you sort of get into the military. So I'd kind of been exposed to it a little bit. And I think at an early age, you don't really understand how to sort of reconcile that or how to process that emotion. You just kind of use, you know, a bit of toughness to try and get through it. And my old man was quite a sort of tough, stoic type of person, so I just kind of relied on those skills. And then got into the military, get into the regiment, and then I think it was a few years in, and then we started getting a whole number of deaths, sort of thing. So I wasn't there for any of the Black Hawk crash or anything like that, but I think there was 3 guys we lost in a training accident. Then there was a couple overseas periodically. So you kind of just like exposed to it at these regular intervals. And then after a while, it's sort of, I think you kind of almost become, I'm trying to think of the word, where like it doesn't impact you that much, sort of thing. Like you become accustomed to it, and then you sort of process it a little bit. And then, like, I had some family die sort of probably around 2013, 14. And for me, it sort of got to the point where, for me personally, like one of the people that died in a training accident was going to be the best man at my wedding, sort of thing. So, you know, I had to replace him. And then it sort of, as it went on, you kind of get to a point where, for me, that I looked at it that there's nothing that can be done for them. Like, it's happened, you know, I mean, it's tragic. It's happened, you know, you look at to see whether, you know, these things can be avoided, what can you learn from it, type of thing. But if I went on and sort of carried on emotionally too much, then that's more around self-pity. So I sort of looked at it as that, you know what, I'll feel for their family. I feel for, you know, some of them had kids that were left behind, these sort of things. So I'll sort of do what I can a little bit around that. But for me personally, I'm not going to go and dwell in my own self-pity, sort of thing, because it's not serving anyone. You know, I'm not sort of being true to the relationship I had with a lot of these people, which was, you know, we'd sort of push each other all the time. We were sort of competitive. We're trying to get the best out of each other. So, you know, I've still got to move forward and keep trying to do what I can or be as good as I can, sort of thing. And especially if you're in a small team, you know, I mean, everyone still relies on each other. You still got a job to do. So I sort of looked at it like that it's sort of, you know, there's an emotional component to it where you process, you know, the time you spent with them, how good that was. You know, you sort of think about what could have been, what you're going to miss, and these sort of things. But personally, for me, there was no point in having too much self-pity, prolonging that sort of thing. And then I think you almost emotionally detach a little bit once you've sort of been exposed to it for so long, is that you kind of, it almost becomes a little bit too rational. So you lose some of that emotional side of it, sort of thing. So, like, for me, it's something now that I've reconciled with. I've reconciled pretty much with my own mortality, and to be honest, I've reconciled my children's mortality, that there's just things outside of my control.
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't mean I expose them to crazy shit. But you sort of understand that for them to go and live a really good life and explore, then I have to be comfortable with the fact that they could get hurt, sort of thing. Like, it's very low probability, but I've kind of reconciled that to a degree. So I guess the way I've gone about it is probably specific to the circumstances and the context I was in, which, like I sort of said, it may not work for other people,
Yeah.
sort of thing. But I'm at a point now where I'm not dragging any negative emotion with me, sort of thing. So it's kind of, you know what, I chose a really difficult job that had consequences.
Yep.
A lot of the people in that chose the same job. You know what I mean? Most of us got through it. Some of us sort of didn't. You know what I mean? But everyone understood what we're getting into.
100%, man. Beautiful, bro. I love listening to the way that you articulated that and speaking about what worked for you. And I took a lot away from that. I loved just listening to you speak and came across very selfless and looking outward is what I took away out of the couple of notes that I just took down from with regard to the experiences and the exposure that you had from a young age moving through and then getting into that, getting into the regiment and then being exposed to that more. And what I was hearing was somebody that was, yep, you feel for, there's nothing else that can be done for that person, but you feel for those that are left behind, and to a degree probably for yourself in that as well, but getting over and getting past that self-pity as you explained, and then looking outwardly, there's other people that still need you there with your team, and there's still a job to do and that sort of stuff, and very selfless, very outward looking. So thanks for sharing that, bro. It's certainly not easy.
Problem. Yeah, and to be honest, like, there was times early on where, you know, you'd spend a day or two in a bottle sort of looking for the answer, and you realise, you know what, this is not getting me anywhere. You know, and then once I had kids, then I just didn't have time to, you know, separate myself from the family, because the kids were little, they still needed me to do everything for them, sort of thing. So I was like, you know what, I have to just accept that this has happened, you know, and don't let pity or my pity interfere with those. So I was sort of, okay, well, I need to deal with this, I need to process it, but then I need to be able to get on because I've got jobs and people that depend on me.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Coops. I wanted to ask you here, what have been some of the key lessons that you've learned about yourself while serving in the regiment for such a long period of time, and using that time, obviously, because it's been so long, almost 2 decades within the regiment itself of service. What have been some of the key lessons that you learned about yourself, and or perhaps maybe your views or opinions on things?
Oh,
I know there'd be plenty, but
yeah,
just what are maybe, I don't know, a handful of standouts.
Yeah, I learned that I hate the water. I know that much.
Yeah, I heard that.
I still don't like going to the beach, sort of thing. Like, I'll take my kids and they're like, "You coming in?" I'm like, nope.
Yeah,
but then again, I'll get over my problems and go and play with them, sort of thing. But yeah, I guess early on, I kind of learnt that. Well, the big thing I learnt was I should have had more courage when I was younger. You know what I mean? Over a number of different aspects. Like, that's something that I learnt and grew, and that sort of courage, you know, to speak out. You know what I mean? Like, in the military is an environment where when you're junior, like, you just don't feel like it's your place to say something, regardless whether you think it's wrong or right. Like, you sit there, keep quiet, because sometimes there is repercussions to saying things. Yeah. So, you know, as you get older, you sort of develop the courage. You're like, you know what, that's wrong. I'm going to say it's wrong. And then, you know, sometimes you have a good discussion. Other times you just get shut down and kind of put in your place a little bit. But you know that a discussion should have taken place. So I sort of learnt that was a skill I had to develop along the way. Yeah. And then kind of understanding, you know, how to deliver that message without sort of being abrasive straight up. Sort of thing. Like, I learnt a lot around how to develop people or mentor them. So early on, it was sort of very much just a hard approach to everything. You know, you know, this is how it's going to be, this is how we've got to do it, sort of thing. Then as you sort of get on, and I think it was a fair change or transition in the type of people that were starting to come through as well. You know, like, I got on the back end of people that had been in an environment where in the battalions a few years before I got there, people would get bashed just for being new, sort of thing. So they'd turn up, you know, they'd sort of get harassed, and they'd be like, okay, this is for the things you're going to do wrong. And that kind of changed, thankfully. And then we're starting to get through people that have just been brought up differently. So, you know, that's like, this is not how the world works. Thank you very much. So, you know, they just don't respond to sort of negative feedback and these sort of things. So you start saying, okay, well, you know what? Do they need negative feedback, to be honest? So, you know, you got to change, or I learnt to change the way I did things that sort of made sure that the message I needed them to understand was what they took away from it, sort of thing.
Gotcha.
So I learned a lot around, you know, the way I respond to pressure, the way I sort of regulate my own emotion and these sort of things, and how that has to be a priority, especially if I'm in a position where I'm trying to guide other people, is because if I can't regulate my response, then I'm never going to be able to get anything out of them. So I had to learn a lot around that sort of thing. And then kind of, I guess you learn a lot about where your head goes when you're in really uncomfortable places, or when you're in a lot of physical pain, or things are difficult. And then over the years, you sort of learn to just put some of that aside, as that's just thoughts. I need to keep going. Sort of thing. And then I guess going to uni as well, I kind of had to almost start a second new life to a degree, a little bit. So there was all this academic stuff I had to go and learn. So I think that kind of evolved me a lot around, you know, a lot of those skills that weren't within the military. So I sort of got a lot of good exposure from there. But yeah, no, I think pretty much my whole career has just been a continual growth. You know, you sort of start going down a path, you realise that that's not quite right, so you pivot a little bit, but just kind of going through and just try not to stuff too much shit up, sort of thing. Early on, I used to get a lot of things wrong, but you know what, that everyone does. You know, that's not me, that's just what I'm capable of in that moment or in that situation or at that time. So just go away, work on the things I need to work on, and, you know, keep improving.
Awesome, man, what really good points. And I know that each one of those in and of themselves would open themselves up to a whole topic by itself for you to speak about, you know, how to develop people, that courage to develop, or you wish you'd had developed a bit more courage when you were younger, or your mind was sort of open to that, personal responses and emotional regulation, those sorts of things. I love how you spoke about being able to pivot and recognize those things and learning from those mistakes. And just one of the key parts that I heard you mention as well is just this continual trajectory of growth which you're on, and obviously I think you're still on that as well, as you do the things that you're doing with the company that you direct and the people that you interact with and the skills and stuff that you're passing on. So thanks for tips for speaking about that, Coops.
Yeah, I heard a thing, I came across something that spoke about two mountains, and I don't remember the full context of it, because I listen to a lot of podcasts when I'm cycling, and I'll sort of cycle to the gym, do a workout, cycle home, because for me it's just an easy way to get in extra sort of non-exercise activity, and I just enjoy cycling. You know, you're out, and I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about two mountains, and the first one was kind of like building his performance, and then the second was into coaching or something like that. And I kind of, for me, I put it into a context of almost climbing three mountains. So one was getting really proficient as an operator, sort of thing, and then you get to the top of that mountain, and then I was like, all right, now I'm going to go and learn as much as I can about developing people, sort of. And I look at it as development around human factors. So everything is associated with building a person. So I started off in sports science, and then I've gone into this huge spider web of different avenues. Some of them I'm well out of my depth, but I just love exploring it. And then the third mountain will be, how do I impart all this knowledge from what I've learned and my experience to then try and help develop people, sort of thing. Because, you know, it's one thing to know it, but it's another thing to be able to package it in a way that people understand, and then they can go and use it, sort of thing. So I've kind of looked, okay, well, I'm kind of still climbing the second, but I can see the third mountain and how this leads into it, sort of thing. So that's how I kind of look at it now.
That's awesome.
You know, that first mountain's behind me, that's gone. There's no point looking back, trying to relive how great that was. You know, I love that experience, but now there's better things in front of me.
Yeah, awesome. That's such a good point. And so, yeah, I like how you've been able to just articulate what you can see now going ahead and using those mountains. That one's behind you. You're still climbing the second one, but you can see where that third one leads and how you are able to impart that in a way that people will understand and connect to it. So that's brilliant, bro.
Yeah, when I heard the two mountains thing, to me that really, I connected to that. I was like, okay, well, I can see how my life's been put together almost like that. Because you have days where you wonder, you know, what am I doing? Like, am I out of my depth here? And then I sort of looked at, okay, well, you know what? It's a long way to climb up this mountain, which is fine. I'm comfortable with that sort of thing. But if I keep going, eventually I'm going to get there.
Yeah, brilliant. Awesome. And I like that there's a piece I heard one time, it might have been Steve Jobs when he was still alive, and talking about connecting the dots. and he spoke about you can only connect the dots backwards to see then what it potentially leads to going forward. That was what I sort of took away from it. But listening to you speak about that, I was like, man, yeah, that's a really good point. As I connect the dots back to what I've been lucky enough to do and where I am now, I understand where I'm at now, and I can also I have a better understanding or vision of what it is that I want or feel like I need to know. And it sounds like the stuff that you've just described and articulated as well, man. That's awesome to hear. I wanted to ask you about, so coming back to the unit itself, what have you noticed? What have been some of the things that you noticed about, you sort of touched on it briefly, about aspires when you mentioned about some of the candidates coming through and stuff on selection. But what have you noticed over the years of aspiring candidates wanting to come and join the unit, SASR, and the difference in particular between those that have passed, or those that passed and those that fail? Is there anything that sort of stands out to you? Because I get asked this a fair bit, and I know other guys do, like yourself with your experience, go, what is it? Is there anything that sort of has stuck out to you over the years, the difference between those that pull out, quit for whatever reason, and those that pass? For me, it seems fairly black and white when I try to answer that question for people, and most of the guys like you, it seems pretty black and white as well. But I just want to ask because I want to make sure I'm not the only one for one, but also to learn and hear from your perspective as well.
Yeah, so to me, ultimately, it's motivation and just whether you're willing to put yourself through that pain or not. So, like, I look at it through a number of different sort of lenses. So I studied the physical side of it for the first few years. I was sort of in the human performance program there.
Right.
And physically, the only thing that had any real difference or any significant difference was body size or body mass. So, people that were around 90 kilos were more likely to pass than people that are around 80 kilos. But it wasn't huge. Like you certainly wouldn't say, if you're 75 kilos, you're not going to get there, because there's guys there who are below 70 kilos. But when you look at it in relation to the relative amount of weight they're carrying, they're just working a lot harder than the guys who are 100 kilos or 110 kilos or 120, because a 40 kilo pack at 120 isn't that much compared to somebody who's 65 kilos and has got a 40 kilo pack on. So they're going to work a lot harder. They're going to break down a lot faster. It's going to be a lot tougher. So mentally, they're going to be a lot stronger than the bigger guys. But other than that, 100%. Physical ability never really showed much. So, like, big guys don't run so fast on the 3.2, but they carry load really well. Some of the guys who are smaller with big VO2, they run really fast. They're not quite as good with load carriage sort of thing. But you need that broad range of people. Then when I sort of talk to the people around the psychological side of it, it's more markers around kind of just their mental strength to get through it. So ultimately it comes down to whether you're willing to pay the price. So whatever your motivation is, and everyone has a different reason for applying, if the strength of that motivation is stronger than the pain of selection, then you're going to get through it. If the pain of selection goes above the strength of that motivation, then you're likely to waver. I will say, one of the things that does appear to be a factor in why people withdraw is really big changes in relationship just before selection. So people that have children, people that have a really significant change in their relationship, when they get into that phase where they're on their own, that seems to play on their mind, and then they seem to withdraw. So that seems to be a factor. But again, it's not exclusive. I mean, like, people will still get through with young kids that have just been born, those sort of things. It just seems to play a bit more of a role. But everything I've looked at, none of it has enough power to look at somebody and go, no, you're not going to make it. Based on their performance sort of thing. So, you'll see guys who turn up who are pure physical specimens and they're gone on day 2. And then you see guys who turn up and you look at them and you're like, mate, did you get on the wrong bus? And the guy is powering on day 17, day 18. So I never used to try and pick. Like, I've seen a few. Some of the older guys that have been around for a long time seem to be reasonable at it. I think some of them overrated their percentages. I think some of them were pretty reasonable.
Exaggerated.
I never got into it. I was like, no, I'm not, because they'd be like, all right, pick who you think. I was like, I'm not getting involved because I've got no idea of who's going to get through this sort of thing. So it's one of the reasons I started looking at the cognitive space around trying to work out, not so much discriminate against who could get through as like a pass-fail thing or as a test, but I was just really curious about it. One of the things that I did look at, which did seem to show a little bit of potential in a selection tool, was their threat response under some of the sort of scenarios that we're doing. So the people that responded better with better regulation during and specifically post the event seemed to have a much higher chance of getting through than the people that didn't, sort of thing. So your ability to sort of, everyone's going to increase when a threat turns up, or everyone's going to go through the threat response. And then it's being able to maintain that at a level that you still got rational control or logical reasoning. And then it's deregulating on the other side of it seems really important, sort of thing. So that in itself seems to be a bit of a skill, a bit of experience, a bit genetic. So
that's awesome.
But again, it's difficult to test for. And I only did a few pilot tests with it, but it's not something that you just go out and do to people regularly, sort of thing. Like, it's just a bit resource intensive, take some equipment. And then I did it a second time, and I think people were assuming that I was doing something else, and they were sort of playing around with the gear, so I got too much artifact in the data collection to tell. I think they were trying to make sure that I couldn't get decent data.
And how long has the human performance part of the unit been there, like been as established as what it is now within the regiment?
So it was around 2009, 2010, I think. So I started uni 2010, I think it was, from memory. Moff had already started doing his psych. Yeah. I think it was around 2010, there was like a futures cell looking at non-traditional ways that we could improve what we're doing, and they were looking at some of the stuff that was going on in the US, because they were starting to just get guys in from sports. So they just put together contracts, went and got guys who they thought were the best, and was like, all right, here's a bucket of money, make us really good. We didn't have anything, so I was like, all right,
here's some sausages and some bread. Come and make us really good.
Who's got some time and is interested? And me and Moff were sort of doing it, so we sort of all came together, and then that's when the initiative started, and then from there it sort of grew. We're just trying to work out where to take this, what it looks like, and I think it's still kind of trying to find its direction and its path.
Right, awesome. Thanks for speaking about that. That's awesome. Good to know. What was it like for you? What's it been like knowing that the last of the hard selections ended after yours, bro? That yours was the last of the hard. Yours was the last of the hard selections.
I think there's been some tough. I've seen some tougher ones than mine, I can tell you now. We didn't do. Like, there's been some really big activities that have like been 24 hours long, and they weren't on mine. And I've watched. Just watching it's hard. And I'm like, thankfully. But yeah, everyone does enjoy that one. I don't know, like, it's hard, and it's one of those things. I think it ebbs and flows. Like, I think they creep for a little bit, and then there's a reset, and then they kind of creep for a little bit. Mine was the first back in Perth, so I'm going to say that was the reset, and then from there it crept a little bit potentially. I don't know. It's hard to say. Maybe they felt sorry that there was only 6 of us and they let us have it easy for a little bit.
Very humble and diplomatic of you with the response.
I'm not going to say it's too hard, because there's people that will ring me up and let me know about it.
Hey, on here, can you talk us through, I always love hearing when guys like you and from other similar units and stuff get to this stage. What was that moment like for you, and was your spouse there with you the day of the badging? Oh, no, she wouldn't have been, because you had already been in the unit for 2-3 years. Okay, so who was there at your badging ceremony when you received your beret, and what did that feel like? How did you feel?
Yeah, for me, I don't think anyone was there from memory.
Right.
Sort of thing. Like, I just don't think they made it across. I don't even think I made a big deal out of it to them.
Right.
Sort of thing. But, like, in a way, it felt relief. Sort of thing. It's like, because, you know, it's like you get told, on some of those courses, you get told every day, you're not here yet. You know what I mean? Like, you could go home tomorrow, and that lives with you the whole cycle. It's like, I'm not here yet. And the minute you stop thinking about it, somebody reminds you about it. Sort of thing. So, you know, you're constantly on wood. Like, you're constantly under this pressure to perform. You know, every time you don't do something at the standard, you're told about it straight away. You know, you'll go and do extra scenarios or extra training sometimes because someone's decided that you just need it. Sort of thing. So when you get there, like, it's it's a bit of a mix of that, accomplishment that you've been able to get through selection, you've got through the training, you've showed that you have potential within that environment, and then a little bit of relief is like, well, you know what, I am here now. Here I am, sort of thing. So I don't know, like it was a good feeling,
Yeah.
sort of thing. But then there's a little bit of apprehension as well, because now you're into the squadron where,
Yeah.
what I mean? It's like, well, I don't know what tomorrow looks like for me, because some of the safety net that comes from instruction and doing what you're told is gone. And now there's an expectation that, all right, that's the job you need to do, go and have at it. And it's like, okay. I mean, like, who's here to help me with this? There's that expectation that you just solve your own problems. So it's sort of a bit of a mixed bag for me.
Awesome. No, that's cool. I'm very grateful for you to share that, and nice to hear those thoughts, that relief. But yeah, I would imagine a great sense of not only relief but happiness too. That's a huge accomplishment, in my view anyway, to go through all of that and come out the other side. So yeah, but you're right. You bring back memories now. You're heading off to the squad and you don't know what day one's going to look like. That's awesome. I wanted to get on to, I've only got a handful of questions for you left for this part here, and you've done such an awesome job at articulating and speaking to many of the other points that you've covered off on some of the other aspects and questions that I had here. But I wanted to ask as well, when you looked to leave the unit and discharge, from there, did you already know you had started studying, but was that were you certain? Did you have something lined up? Did you have a job or something lined up when you started looking at transitioning out of the unit?
Yeah, so sort of was at a point where I was ready, or I felt kind of ready, sort of thing. So in saying that, we were in the process of building a new house in Perth. So we bought some land, we were building a new house. So, we were establishing a foothold in there. And then I was just exploring opportunities, sort of thing. So I was keen on sport, or interested in sport, because it's just another one of those things that seems really exciting. You don't know much about it. It's behind its own closed door. You're like, oh, I want to go and have a look at that. Yeah. And then an opportunity just came up. So I actually took all my leave and my long service at half pay. So I had a fair bit of leave just because we've been so busy.
Gotcha.
And work was kind of coming out of that really busy operational period.
Yeah.
And then it was going through its own kind of difficult transition. So I probably left at a pretty reasonable time, because sort of it's had its own issues post that. So the opportunity came up, took all my leave and everything, moved across to Brisbane, and because I came to sport, they sort of helped with the move, so awesome. It wasn't really costing anything. It was kind of like a risk-free 2-year look almost, sort of thing, where we can go have a look. Financially, everything's going to be the same. It's not going to cost us anything. We've still got the house in Perth. I can still go back to the regiment if I don't like it.
Yeah.
And then we came over and I was enjoying my time in sport, and then another opportunity came up for Tracy, and we sort of had a discussion. All right, well, what do we do? Do we stay here with this? Okay, it's going to create a little bit more complexity around some things, or we can go back to Perth where things are comfortable and safe. And then ultimately we decided to stay here, sort of thing. And then, like everyone, a transition is its own kind of piece. I think if you've got something to go into that challenges you, that gives you sort of a bit of value in what you're doing, that keeps you occupied and these sort of things, and it's not too bad. So when I went into the Reds, that transition was quite easy, because that was quite a competitive environment. It was very similar. It was something where I was comfortable going into, and then going from that into a PhD, that's completely foreign. So that's been a completely different transition or process, sort of thing, with some of its own sort of challenges, trying to learn some of the stuff around analysing data and all this other stuff that I've no idea what I'm doing. So I think it kind of depends a little bit on the person and what they're going into, sort of thing. Yeah. So we sort of in the process where we knew once we separated, there's going to be a difficult period for a while. We just worked through that, and then we'd sort of be better off on the other side of it, sort of thing. So, coming out of the PhD, then we can start to organise a few other things. But I think it was just the point in time where I was ready to leave. There were other things going on, and it was just kind of cutting that umbilical cord, sort of thing. Because you can get really comfortable, feel really safe in that environment because it has good job security. The the routine at that time was pretty standard. It was just sort of very low risk because there wasn't a lot going on. And I think some people kind of just get caught in that, and then they go a little bit stale because it's the same thing. These at one point in their lives, everyone in there was really driven, sort of thing. So I don't know. Like, I talked to a few people around the transition. Some people do it really well. Some people struggle with it a little bit.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things that I think that at some point you're going to have to go through it. Like, it's not isolated to the military. If you've got 20, 30-year career police officers or people in sports or somebody in any business that's been there for that long, like, it's just moving out of what is almost certainty around your daily routine into uncertainty is going to be difficult, sort of thing. But I think people that leave before they're ready or they're sort of forced out due to injuries or these sort of things, and that's a completely different story. So thankfully I left by my own volition, had some stuff to go to, and everything I've done has been my choice. So whether it's turned out good or bad, it's my choice, and I sort of comfortable with the fact that some of my choices don't work out so well. I've just got to find a way to make those work.
Awesome, man. Far out. Beautiful and great to hear. And I wanted to ask you, so when you went to the Queensland Reds, you're talking about the rugby union team, right?
Yep.
Who was the coach at that time? Was it Brad Thorne?
It was just after Brad Thorne came on, yeah.
Ah, right. Awesome.
Yep.
And what was that dynamic like for you with regards to you've come from where you've come from, this environment, fairly secretive, closed door, high performing, high functioning, to this other type of high performing, high functioning environment? What was that initial sort of moment like for you once you were in there and starting to come to terms with meeting people and all that sort of stuff that were there? What was that like?
Yeah, it was fairly easy, to be honest, sort of thing. Like, it was almost getting put into another troop.
Nice.
You know what I mean? Like, because they're people, and a lot of them really focus on performance. They're focused on outcomes. You know what I mean? Like, when you're in the military, we talk about a no-fail mission sort of thing, and then they're very outcome driven. You know what I mean? Like, you get your mission, you go and you try and do that, like, sort of thing. So they're very similar because it's all about wins. At that stage, we weren't winning a lot, so there's a little bit of pressure kicking around that. But it was quite easy because there was a lot of similarities within the environment there and the environment I've been in, sort of thing. So I was just going around trying to get to know those guys, build those relationships, sort of work out, where I can have my best impact, how do I perform in this environment, what do I bring, and sort of how do I get the best out of myself and out of them, sort of thing, without trying to impose anything on them. So I sort of just spent the first couple of months trying to work out what my involvement looked like within that environment, and then just sort of making sure that I could turn up and give the best I could every day, sort of thing.
Awesome, man. That's brilliant. And I just wanted to wrap up with a couple of things and have you touch on one more point after as well. Is I didn't ask you yet. So during your career within the unit, how many deployments did you head off on? Did you end up going away on, Coops?
So I sort of looking at two different types. So there was the 4 to 6 month operational deployments, which was sort of mainly combat focused. So I think it was around 6 or 7 of those. And then around about 6 of the shorter sort of 2 weeks to month long, where they're kind of more security stuff, and a couple others that I sort of won't go into any detail, but they're like a specific activity that you're going out for. So I think it was around about a dozen all up, or a cumulative, I think, close to 4 years, sort of thing. So, because a lot of those combat ones we do, they're pretty short because just the intensity of those operations and the frequency, and I think it still burnt a lot of dudes out. Yeah. Just with the tempo that we had for that sort of period between sort of 2007 2012.
And is there anything that you would change about your time? Doesn't sound like there is, but is there anything that you would change about your time either in the unit or leading up to?
I look at those two different ways. So one way I look at it is I wouldn't change anything, because the good, the bad, the things I did, the things I didn't do, all crafted where I am right now. Sort of thing. So if I change, like the sort of butterfly or ripple effect, you know what I mean? Like, if you change one thing, then it puts you on an alternate path. But then I look back and go, you know what? Maybe I change everything. Maybe I just take this on, so just explore a completely different pathway, out of that sort of curiosity, fascination side. But ultimately, this is where I am.
Yeah.
What happened got me here, so I'm happy with where I am, sort of thing. Like I don't have any big regrets. You know, and people say, you know, what would you go and tell yourself when you're younger? The thing I'd probably tell myself is just have a little bit more courage, be a bit more courageous around everything, really. You know what I mean? Like there's things that I could have explored that I didn't, things I could have done that I didn't. So just be, you know what? Don't hesitate so much. Don't be worried so much. Just take shit on.
That's awesome to hear you say that, because do you find yourself even now going through and having experienced everything that you've experienced and doing what you're doing now, which I'd like you to speak about shortly, do you find that from time to time you still speak to yourself and say just get on with it, or have the courage, or is it sort of automatic now?
It depends on the circumstances, to be honest, I think. So one of the things, and we'll probably touch on this more later on, that I specifically did on the last adventure race I did was I became very deliberate in the mindset I went onto it with, or the intention that I went on there with. And when things got really difficult, I just had a key phrase for me about how I wanted to do that race, that I just used that, and that reminded me to stop worrying about trivial shit, or that I'm tired, or that it's dark, or you know, I've been walking for 18 hours or whatever it was, and just keep moving, sort of thing. So I still, in that context, I'll still have to deliberately reframe my thoughts from time to time to stop worrying about negativity or weakness or whatever it is. In the academic world, everything there is new to me. So, you know, I'll be putting together, like I got an article published recently at the beginning of the year, and when I'm writing that article, I'm looking at it, and there are thoughts in my head that are like, you know what, these guys are going to catch you out for being the idiot that you are. You know what I mean? Like, you go through that imposter syndrome type of thing where you're like, you know what, I'm way out of my depth here, and at some point I'm going to come up for air and everyone's going to see it. But then you sort of, you look at it and go, you know what, everyone's trying to hold their breath and hang on. So it's kind of just getting past that and thinking, yeah, you know what, if I send it off and it comes back, I'll just adjust the points that are on there, and then I'll send it off. Like the first draft is always going to be rubbish. So now, like everything I send off, I know it'll go back and forth 4 or 5 times, and it's going to come back every time with a heap of pen on it, with a heap of adjustments, sort of thing. So it's like, you know what, each time it goes away, I'll just refine my writing a little bit better, sort of thing. So, you know, what I produce now for a first draft is way better than what I produced for a first draft when I was doing my bachelor's or the undergrad. So, yeah, ultimately, you still go through that. And even parenting, you go through that all the time. You're like, do I know what I'm doing here? And my actions actually have an impact on another human being now. So, you know, I mean, try not to stuff this up too bad, sort of thing. So, yeah, I think everyone does, but it's just trying to get hold of those thoughts as quick as you can, and then sort of understand, you know what is there anything I need to be worried about here? And if it is, what do I need to do to fix it? Or is this just me starting up one of those thought circles that's going nowhere, and it's just occupying time that I could be doing with something more positive or more productive?
Man.
But yeah,
Awesome.
I think I'll have those thoughts forever. Like I look back now, and I remember when I was younger, you look at somebody who was in their mid-40s and you think, you know what, that guy's so mature and so old. And now I'm there, I'm like, man, I'm still a child. Like, when I'm 80, I'll still be a child in my head. So, you know what I mean?
100%, yeah. So mature, so old, yeah. My kids have a habit of telling me how old I am, reminding me how old I am. But, man, so good to hear you speak about that and to share that advice and your perspective as well. I really took away from just listening to you speak about that. And I was wondering, just as a way to sort of look towards wrapping this one up, would you mind just speaking about some of the stuff that you do just at a high level type thing, because that will be the segue, I guess, into me wrapping up this conversation with you in terms of what you do now, the business, like the name of your business and how to pronounce that properly. So I've deliberately not tried to say the name of the company that you're the director of, because I want to wait till you say it correctly, because I prefer to say things right. And maybe a bit about what the intent is. So sort of your company, what you do, and what the intent is going forward with regards to what you're doing, because that's the stuff I'd love to come back and speak with you about, which will lead into obviously talking about a bit more about the transition, the ultra endurance stuff that you're doing, find out how many more of those are you going to be looking to do. Have you got some more on the pipeline and that sort of stuff that you're looking at doing and raising funds like you did for the latest one and that sort of thing? So would you mind just giving us an overview of that?
Yeah, definitely. So priority outside of family at the moment, so like professionally sort of thing, is just finishing off the PhD. So I'm probably 2/3 of the way through that. I may have to extend just because of the travel restrictions had an impact on what I was able to do, what I couldn't do. So I'm kind of trying to fight that timeline.
Gotcha.
So I'm trying to get that done, sort of slowly growing the business side of things with the company that you sort of mentioned, which is Comanche Group. So I'm just kind of slowly getting that out there. As I sort of get more free time around my PhD, then I'll start to invest more time into that sort of thing. So that's just doing a little bit of work here and there as it comes up.
Gotcha.
And that's a lot around the point I'll use to disseminate all the information I've learned, all the stuff I've got from experience. So everything that I've kind of spoken about, or that third mountain that I've sort of alluded to, that's kind of what I'll use for that. So that I put out a fair bit of free content just to get people thinking. You know what I mean? Like you put out a video or something like that, or you write something and people read it and they think, you know what, I'm saying that from a place of certainty where, you know, it's just like this, it's more of like this is kind of what things allude to or what we understand at the moment around things, but it's more to generate thought sort of thing, not to say, you know, this is how it is, everybody take note. So I'll grow that a little bit, sort of looking at different areas where I can sort of add value around people that are performing under pressure. So I'm doing a little bit of work within the tactical environments, looking at sort of sport and a few other these things, particularly sports or pursuits where it's very cognitive heavy, because a lot of stuff I look at is around peak cognition. So anything that's got a lot of decision making has pressure, these sort of things, which is basically everything. It's just in a different context. Family's a big one. Like that will never take, or nothing will ever take priority over family. So when I look at it, there's no work-life balance sort of thing. It's just competing priorities, and nothing will compete with the priority of family as best I can. Like occasionally you will sacrifice some time with family for something that you feel is important, or compromise time with family, but when I weigh it all up, family will always have priority sort of thing. So I'll go to the kids' sports carnival over, you know, go and have a coffee with somebody that may be a future client or something. You know, like, all right, I've got this on, and I'll, you know, your time will come shortly afterwards, sort of thing. So that's one of the things that I'll never compromise, is that family. And then in the pursuits, midway or just towards the end of the Iditarod, I thought I was done. I was kind of happy that I was done. I'd achieved that. Probably about 4 to 5 weeks later, the thought, or the seed of hitting the South Pole sort of slowly started growing. So I'm kind of joking around a solo expedition to the South Pole.
You could never do that, mate.
I was going to say, you don't have to grow that
It's
thought
the stew.
anymore. I've sort of, that's always been a big thing for me, is doing the South Pole. So randomly it's shorter than the distance I did on the Iditarod. Just the conditions are a lot tougher. Sort of thing. So I don't know, that's a big trip. Like that's a big task. So that's kind of something that I'm looking at. And, you know, I sort of say never. We'll see what happens. But then I've sort of spoken to the kids. When they're older, I'd love to take them on some of these big adventure races, sort of thing, like going through the Yukon, probably on a bike more so than foot next time, or Alaska with one or both of the boys. I think would be a great experience. So, or even, you know, any number of other sort of events, races, trekking, anything like that. So, you know, as they get older, it'll be a lot around, you know, let's go and explore the world, you know, and just sort of spend time with each other out in that outdoors and just have some really good experiences.
Beautiful, mate. Man, that's so awesome. And that was just a stir up too. I know you could absolutely smash it if you wanted to do it. So that was just taking into consideration some of your comments earlier with guys winding you up and having to go at each other. Yeah. But mate, I've really loved this time with you, Coops, and hearing you speak about some of your experiences. I know it's sort of been one eye focused from my side with regards to the context predominantly of this conversation with you, but you've just summed up really nicely about the stuff that you're doing now. I love how you talk about your family and that the fact that nothing will ever come first before that, and there may be some times where you compromise bits and pieces, but just that simplicity of that example of you'll attend the child's or one of your children's games first.
Yeah,
Just
and I know
awesome,
you're
mate.
big on family as well, so I know you completely understand. Like one of the things or passions I have is kind of around how do we make young boys into better men, sort of thing, because I think there's a real gap there. So the first part is me playing my role to make sure that my two boys grow up into really well-behaving, socially adjusted, just really good human beings, sort of thing. They're not out stealing cars for TikTok. They're not out doing drugs. They're not out doing all those other things. And I know there's a lot of factors that go into these things, but I'll do everything I can to make sure that I'm not one of those factors.
Awesome, mate. Yeah, beautiful. And so I look forward to connecting with you again to delve more into some of the stuff with Comanche Group and things that you're doing there from the professional side as well as hearing a whole bunch more about the prep for the South Pole, because I'm sure that's going to be carrying on, and what your wife, what your sweetheart thinks about that too.
Yeah, I don't know. She's already not amused.
Yeah, I bet. But mate, and just on that as well, it would be a huge privilege and honor if your spouse, if your wife would consider being on the podcast. It's been a long time since I've seen her as well, back in the day in Perth at her gym and all that sort of thing. But it's been an absolute privilege to have you on, mate, and I look forward to connecting with you again to share more of some of the experiences that you have and discuss more about the second mountain that you're climbing. And also by then, or hopefully not too far away, but there'll be, I would assume, somebody like you will have more of a clearer vision and idea about some of your intent about passing that knowledge on for that third mountain. So, bro, much love to you and your family. Great to see you again, and wishing you all the very best with everything that's happening, mate. And I'll send through some details so that we can connect again.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I've really enjoyed chatting, sort of thing. So, like I said, I'll try and be as open and honest as I can, and just try and give as much as I can to try and help out the audience. So, yeah, it's been really good and great catching up again.
Yeah, awesome, man. Thank you very much, bro. I'm going to hit stop on here, and if you just leave yours on for a sec, we'll catch up a bit offline.
Yeah, yep, yeah, easy.